"You're not going to believe this," I whispered into my phone, hiding in the hotel bathroom. The sound of my racing heart seemed loud enough to echo off the tiles. I'd met someone, there was a pause, and I knew my best friend, Sarah, was gearing up to drop a wisdom bomb. "At the conference, Anna, you're married," she reminded me, her voice a blend of concern and disbelief. I know, I sighed, staring at my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked like me but with a wildness in her eyes that was new. There's something about him, Sarah, it's like he sees me, the real me, not just the mom or the wife." Sarah was silent for a moment. "Just be careful, okay, you have a lot to lose." I ended the call and leaned against the cool tile, trying to calm the storm inside me. Liam, his name played on a loop in my mind. We had bumped into each other in the most cliché of ways, me spilling my coffee all over his crisp white shirt. But instead of getting angry, he had laughed, his eyes lighting up in a way that made my stomach do somersaults. Throughout the conference, our paths kept crossing, each encounter sending unfamiliar jolts of excitement through me. Liam was charismatic, a breath of fresh air in my routine life. He talked about his travels, his adventures, and I hung on to every word. It was a connection I hadn't felt in years, and it scared me just as much as it thrilled me. That night, at the conference dinner, I found myself seated next to him. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and I found myself sharing little pieces of my life I hadn't even realized I was holding back. He listened, really listened, and I felt seen in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the evening wore on, the air between us was electric with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. I was aware of his every move, the way his hands rushed mine as we both reached for the bread, the warmth of his leg barely touching mine through the table. It was a dance of proximity that was intoxicating. Walking back to my room, I felt a mix of guilt and excitement. I was a married woman, with a husband and a child waiting for me back home. Michael, my husband, was the safe choice I had made a decade ago. He was reliable, steady, and loved me in a quiet, undemanding way. But next to the fire that Leo ignited in me, my life with Michael felt like a black and white movie. I stood in front of my hotel room, keycard in hand, my mind a battleground of emotions. One part of me screamed to run away from this madness, to go back to the safety of my life. But another part, a part one didn't recognize, yearned to dive headfirst into this roaring wave of feelings. With a deep breath, I unlocked my door and stepped inside, closing it on the possibilities that lay in the hall. I couldn't risk everything for a fleeting attraction. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just shifted on its axis, and nothing would ever be the same again. "Can you believe we're doing this?" I texted Leo, my fingers trembling slightly. I was waiting in the corner cafe we had agreed to meet at, hidden behind a large latte and an even larger pair of sunglasses. His reply was immediate, a simple wink emoji that sent my heart racing. This was crazy. Me, Anna, the woman who organized PTA meetings and baked cookies for the neighborhood kids, sitting here waiting for. What exactly? A man who wasn't my husband, that's what. I glanced around nervously, half expecting someone I knew to walk in and catch me red-handed. But the cafe was filled with strangers, all absorbed in their own worlds. It was a relief and a reminder of how isolated I had become in my own life. When Leo walked in, everything else faded into the background. He had that effect, like turning up the color in a dull photograph. He spotted me and his face lit up with a smile that made me forget my guilt, if only for a moment. "Hey, beautifully," he greeted, his voice a warm caress. We talked about everything and nothing, our conversation meandering like a lazy river. He made me laugh, a deep, genuine laugh that I hadn't heard from myself in ages. It was as if he had unlocked a part of me that had been asleep and forgotten. As the cafe began to empty, our talk turned more personal. Leo shared stories of his travels, of the places he'd seen and the people he'd met. He talked about his dreams, his ambitions, things he'd never told anyone. I listened, mesmerized, sharing my own hidden desires and fears in return. It was then, in that quiet cafe, that the line blurred. A touch of his hand on mine, a look that lingered too long, and we crossed a boundary that I knew there was no coming back from. My heart was a crater, beating loudly like death, cheering on every reckless decision. We walked out into the cold evening, our steps sinking in a dangerous dance. I knew I should go home, back to Michael, the life I had built. But instead, I found myself walking with Leo. Our destination had spoken and understood. At his hotel room, the reality of what we were doing hit me like a cold wave. This was no longer an innocent flirtation, and this used to distract me from the mundanity of my life. This was real, and it was happening. I should have felt guilty, should have thought of Michael, kind and unsuspecting at home. But in that moment, all I could think about was Leo and the way he made me feel alive. Afterwards, lying in his arms, the guilt finally crept in, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. What had I done? How had I let it come to this? I was a wife, a mother, and now, a cheater. I slipped out of his bed and into the night, my heart heavy with a secret that now weighed me down. The walk back to my hotel was a blur, each step taking me further away from the person I thought I was and closer to a stranger I didn't recognize. Back in my room, I stared at myself in the mirror, searching for signs of the betrayal I had just committed. But all I saw was the same Anna, with the same tired eyes and the same fake smile. I crawled into bed, hugging my guilt close. Sleep was a distant dream, chased away by the realization of what I had risked, and what I stood to lose. My life with Michael, once a picture of contentment, now felt like a fragile house of cards, ready to tumble down with the slightest breeze. And I, with my own hands, had just unleashed a storm. "Mom, are you even listening to me?" My son's voice, tinged with annoyance, snapped me back to reality. I was sitting at our kitchen table, staring at a half-eaten sandwich, lost in a world miles away from our cozy, suburban home. "Sorry, honey, what were you saying?" I forced a smile, tucking away thoughts of Leo into a corner of my mind. It had been a week since the conference, since Leo, and I crossed a line I never thought I'd move. Since then, it was like I was living two lives. One where I was the perfect wife and mother, and another where I was someone else entirely, someone who knew the taste of what would improve and craved it relentlessly. My son, Jake, rolled his eyes, a typical preteen gesture. I was saying, "Can I go to Matt's after school tomorrow?" "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, trying to sound enthusiastic. But my mind was elsewhere, on a text message burning a hole in my pocket. Leo had been texting me, each message a promise of excitement and danger. I knew I should stop, should end whatever this was before it spiraled out of control. But every time I looked at Michael, my husband, all I could see was the predictability of our life together, a stark contrast to the adrenaline which I felt with Leah. Michael walked into the kitchen, wrapping his arms around me in a familiar embrace. "Rough day?" he asked, planting a kiss on my forehead. "Something like that," I mumbled, leaning into his warmth while my heart screamed in protest. Later that night, as I lay in bed next to Michael, his steady breathing and lullabies our years together, I felt the walls closing in. My life with Michael was safe, secure, but it was also suffocating me, holding me down in a sea of routine and responsibility. I slipped out of bed, quietly making my way to the living room. My phone lit up with a new message from Leo, "Meet me tomorrow?" It read, simple yet loaded with temptation. I knew I should say no, should end this madness before it destroyed everything I held dear. But as I typed out a response, agreeing to see him, I realized I was already too far gone. I was addicted to the thrill, to the feeling of being desired, and I couldn't stop. Meeting Leo became our dangerous routine. We would steal moments whenever we could, each encounter a mix of passion and fear. Fear of getting caught, of losing everything, but it only added to the intensity of our affair. I tried to balance my two lives, but it was like walking a tightrope. At home, I became more distant, lost in my thoughts, and my family started to notice. Michael's brow would furrow in confusion when I spaced out at dinner, and Jake would get frustrated with my lack of attention. It all came crashing down one evening when Michael found a text from Leo on my phone. His face, usually so kind and gentle, twisted in anger and hurt as he read the words that shattered our world. "Anna, what is this?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper but cutting through me like a knife. I had no words, no excuses that could explain away the betrayal. I watched as the man I had loved for over a decade crumbled before my eyes, and I knew that I had caused this pain. In that moment, I realized the true cost of my actions. I had risked everything for a fleeting moment of excitement, and now I was about to lose it all. My family, my home, my life as I knew it, all hanging by a thread that I had severed with my own hands. The guilt, which I had pushed away for so long, came crashing over me like a tidal wave. I had been selfish, reckless, and now I was about to pay the price. The look in Michael's eyes, a mix of pain and disbelief, would haunt me for the rest of my life. As Michael walked away, leaving me standing alone with the wreckage of our life, I realized how far I had fallen. I had stepped out on a ledge, chasing a fantasy, and now I was free falling with no one to catch me. It's over, I whispered to myself, staring blankly at the back of the mirror. The reflection staring back seemed like a stranger, a woman caught in the storm, thrown naked. Last night, Michael had discovered the affair. His heartbroken eyes haunted me, a stark reminder of the chaos I had unleashed. I stepped into the shower, letting the hot water cascade over me, as if it could wash away my guilt and betrayal. But the steam couldn't blur the harsh reality awaiting me outside. Exiting the bathroom, I found Michael sitting at the kitchen table, his usual morning paper untouched. The air was thick with unspoken words and stifled emotions. Michael, My voice trailed off, unsure how to begin. He looked up, his eyes a pool of hurt and confusion. How could you, Anna? His voice was a pained whisper, each word etching deeper into my guilt. I don't know, I admit it, my voice barely audible. I never meant to hurt you. Michael's gaze shifted away, focusing on something distant, perhaps a happier memory from a time before our lives were tainted by lies. The silence was broken by the sound of Jake getting ready for school. We both instinctively masked our turmoil, putting on a brave face for our son. But the facade was thin, and I could tell Jake sensed something was off. After Jake left, the silence returned, heavier than before. I knew I had to face the consequences of my actions. Michael, we need to talk. He nodded, a resigned acceptance in his posture. I sat across from him, gathering the shards of my courage. I met someone at the conference, I began, my voice trembling. It started as a harmless connection, but it escalated quickly. I poured out the truth, not sparing any details. The affair with Leo, the secret meetings, the lies, everything. Michael listened, his expression an unreadable mask. When I finished, he stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I need time to process this, he said, his voice hollowed. I nodded, understanding his need for space. As he left the room, a part of me left with him, the part that had been his wife, his partner. I was alone, the silence of the house echoing my inner turmoil. My affair with Leo, once a thrilling escape, now felt like a weight dragging me down to an abyss of regret. I had risked my merits, the family, for a fleeting moment of passion. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to distract myself with chores, but each task was a reminder of the life I had jeopardized. The pictures on the wall, the familiar comfort of our home, all seemed to mock me for what I stood to lose. Evacuating, I received a text from Leo. We need to talk, he read, but the sight of his name no longer sparked excitement, only a deepening sense of dread. I met him at the same cafe where our affair had blossomed. Seeing him now, in the cold light of reality, I realized how much I had idealized him, how much I had sacrificed for this illusion. Leo, I can't do this anymore, I said, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. I've hurt the people I love, and I can't keep living this lie. He tried to persuade me, his words a familiar siren song, but I was no longer the same person who had fallen for his charm. I saw him now for what he was, a catalyst for my own self-destruction. Leaving the cafe, I felt a sense of finality. The affair was over, but the damage was done. I had to face the aftermath, the broken trust, and the uncertain future. As I drove home, I realized that the road to redemption would be long and fraught with challenges. I had shattered the trust in my marriage, and rebuilding it, if even possible, would require more than just apologies. Stepping into the empty house, the weight of my choices settled on my shoulders. I had risked everything for a moment of fashion, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of the life I had so carelessly fractured. Michael, wait, my voice echoed through the empty hallway as he packed his bags. The finality of each sip was like a countdown to the end of our life together. He didn't stop, didn't even look back. I need some time away, Anna, he said, his voice steady in the distant. I can't be here right now, not with everything that's happened. I watched, paralyzed, as the man I had loved for more than a decade walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind him was like a seal on the tomb of our marriage. There I stood, in the midst of our shared life, now fractured beyond recognition. The house felt cavernous, a hollow shell echoing with the remnants of a happier past. I moved through the rooms aimlessly, each step a reminder of what I had lost. The photos on the wall, the tent and the sofa where Michael always sat, the kitchen where we had cooked countless meals together, all these memories now changed with the bitterness of betrayal. My mind replayed the confrontation over and over. Michael's pain, his disbelief, his heartbreak, it was all my doing. I had shattered the trust and love he had given me so freely, and now I was alone, drowning in a sea of regret. The silence of the house was sudden. I found myself reaching for my phone, a habit formed over the weeks of my affair. But as I scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over Leo's name, I realized the futility. Leo was not the solution, he was a part of the problem. I put the phone down, my decision clear. I had to face the consequences of my actions alone. There was no knight in shining armor, no rescue from the mess I had created. It was just me, my mistakes, and the long road to redemption ahead. The days that followed were a blur of emptiness. Michael's absence was a constant reminder of the void I had created in our lives. I tried to keep up appearances for Jake, but he was old enough to sense the tension, the unspoken words hanging in the air. "Where's Dad?" he asked one evening, his innocent eyes searching mine for answers. "He's taking some time for himself," I managed to say, choking back tears. "We're going through a difficult time right now." Jake nodded, his expression a mix of confusion and sadness. "Is it because of you and Leo?" he asked, his words striking me like a physical blow. I had no answer, no way to shield him from the ugly truth. "I'm so sorry, Jake," I whispered, pulling him into a hug. "I made a big mistake, and I'm trying to fix it." He hugged me back, but I could feel the distance between us, the trust one had broken not just with Michael, but with my son as well. In the midst of this turmoil, I realized something crucial: I was pregnant. The realization hit me like a wave, leaving me breathless and scared. Whose child was this? Michael's? Leo's? The uncertainty of it added another layer of complexity to the already tangled web of my life. I knew I had to tell Michael, and Leo too. But the thought of facing either of them, of revealing this new twist in our already complicated story, was overwhelming. I sat at the kitchen table, the pregnancy test in front of me, a silent testament to the consequences of my actions. I was at a crossroads, with each path leading into the unknown. The future I had envisioned, the life I had built with Michael, was now a distant dream. And as I sat there, alone with my thoughts and my growing child, I realized the journey ahead would be the hardest one I had ever embarked on. But it was a journey I had to take, not just for myself, but for my family, for my child, and for the chance to mend the broken pieces of our lives. The baby might not be yours. My voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the air like a knife. I was sitting across from Michael in a small, quiet cafe we used to love. I had chosen it for its privacy, but now the familiar surroundings felt old, heavy with the weight of my confession. Michael's face was a mask of shock, pain, and delusion. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice strange. I took a deep breath, words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I'm pregnant, Mikey, and there's a chance the baby could be yours." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked away, his hand trembling slightly, and took a sip of his coffee. I could see the storm of emotions raging behind his eyes: hurt, anger, disbelief. "I'm sorry," I said, the words inadequate for the magnitude of my betrayal. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Michael finally looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I need to figure it out, and I need to do it on my own." Leaving the cafe, I felt the final thread connecting me to Michael's snap. I was on my own now, truly on my own. The reality of my situation hit me as I walked back to my car. Pregnant, alone, and unsure of the future. I called Leo next, my heart heavy with dread. His reaction was everything I feared. "I can't be a part of this, Anna," he said coldly. "You need to handle this on your own." His words stopped, but they also brought clarity. Leo wasn't the man I had thought he was. He was a mirage, an escape from my reality that I had clung to desperately. Now, left alone to face the consequences, I saw him for who he truly was. In the following days, I felt a profound sense of isolation. My friends, sensing the turmoil, kept their distance. Sarah, who had always been my rock, was suddenly unreachable, lost in her own problems. I spent my days in a daze, going through the motions of daily life. Work, home, sleep, the cycle of emptiness. But in the quiet moments, I began to reflect on my life, on the choices I had made. I realized that I had been living in a fantasy, avoiding the hard truths of my life. My marriage to Michael, while comfortable, had been unfulfilling. I had craved excitement, validation, something to break the monotony. And in my pursuit of that, I had lost sight of what truly matters: my family, my integrity, myself. It was time for a change, time for me to take responsibility for my actions and their consequences. I started seeing a therapist, a gentle woman who listened without judgment as I poured out my heart. With her help, I began the slow process of self-discovery. I delved into the reasons behind my actions, the parts of myself I had ignored or suppressed. I learned about my needs, my desires, and most importantly, about the kind of person I wanted to be. This journey wasn't easy. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by guilt and shame, days when I questioned if I could ever make things right. But I kept going, one step at a time, driven by the hope of a better future. As my pregnancy progressed, so did my understanding of myself. I was no longer the woman who had walked into that conference months ago. I was someone stronger, more self-aware, and more determined to build a life based on truth and integrity. The path ahead was uncertain, and I knew there would be more challenges to face. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face them. I was no longer running away, I was moving forward, one step at a time, towards a future I was determined to build on my own terms. Mom, why did you and Dad split up? Jake's question, innocent yet loaded, hit me during our quiet dinner. The clatter of cutlery seemed too loud in the small kitchen where the three of us, myself, Jake, and the baby growing inside me, sat. I looked into his eyes, so much like his father's, and realized the time for half-truths was over. I made some mistakes, Jake, big ones, and Dad and we couldn't find a way through them together. He nodded, a maturity beyond his ears in his gaze. Is it because of the baby? He asked next, his voice hesitant. Yes, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The baby is a part of it. We ate in silence after that, but it was a comfortable one. It was as if a barrier had been lifted between us, the honesty clearing the air. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Once, I had thought Leo was the answer to my unhappiness. Now, I understood that the answer lay within me. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself and my children. My pregnancy was a constant reminder of the consequences of my actions, but it also represented hope. A new life, a new beginning. Therapy sessions became a regular part of my routine, each visit peeling back layers of self-deception and denial. I learned to face my flaws, to accept them, and to work on them. The woman who had sought validation in affair was slowly transforming into someone stronger, more self-reliant. I also reached out to Michael, not to ask for reconciliation, but for closure. We met at a park, a neutral ground surrounded by the signs of life and bored. Michael, I began, my heart heavy, I'm sorry. For everything. He looked at me, and I saw the hurt had receded, leaving behind hilarity. I know, Anna, and I forgive you, but I can't forget it. I nodded, understanding his words. I don't expect you to come back. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on myself, for our kids. He smiled, a small, sad smile. I can see that, and I'm glad, they need you. We talked for a while, not about us, but about Jake, about how we would co-parent, about how we would move forward. It was a conversation marked not by love, but by a mutual respect and understanding that had survived the wreckage of our marriage. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I prepared for the arrival of the baby. I set up a nursery, picking out colors and decorations, each choice a statement of my commitment to this new life. I also began writing. At first, it was just a journal, a way to sort through my thoughts. But gradually, it turned into something more, a memoir of sorts, a reflection of my journey. Writing became my therapy, my way of making sense of the chaos of the past year. The day I went into labor, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. This was it, the moment when everything would change again. Michael was there, not as my partner, but as a supportive presence for Jake and, in a way, for me. The birth was a blur of pain and emotion, culminating in the arrival of a tiny, perfect being. Holding my baby for the first time, I felt a surge of love and protection unlike anything I had ever experienced. In the days that followed, as I adjusted to life as a mother of two, I realized that this was my new beginning. Not a fairy tale, but a reality, filled with challenges and joys. I continued writing, my story a testament to the power of self-reflection and change. And as I wrote the words, I knew that while one chapter of my life had ended, another was just beginning. My journey hadn't been easy, but it had led me to a place of understanding and acceptance.